Welcome to Health Oddity, the show that strips away the jargon and hype surrounding all things health and fitness to help you live a long, strong and energetic life. Lining up at the bar this week, here's Peter Lant, Paul Bassett and James St. Pierre.
Hello and welcome to Health Oddity. It's podcast 53. We're joined today with a very special guest who's returning. We first spoke to him in January, so we're very excited about this. Got some questions, and he actually has the award. If we were to give out awards, he have the award for probably the most referenced individual on this podcast, whether it's quotes or just to complain about how hard he makes us work. But I'll get onto that in a second. I'm just going to say hey to Peter. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm just going to say Return of the Mac, and it's not Mark Morrison. So there you go.
Oh my God! Old enough to remember and love that song.
Right. Well, we can get on with some bogling later. I briefly worked with Aswad. I'll leave it there. James, how are you doing?
I'm very, very good. We've just had a fantastic weekend with Dan John over. And myself and Pete spent some time with him. So I'm fired up and looking forward to this episode and catching up with Paul. Well, have we said? Sorry.
Hey, I mean, the big reveal is gone.
Catching up with someone again. I'm looking forward to this.
We've got Paul and we've got Mac. Who could it be?
Right. Well, okay. Well, it's Paul McIlroy. Welcome, Paul. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good.
Fantastic.
Yeah. That was that veiled introduction. Didn't last for long.
No. Well, I mean,
it's good to be back.
Good to be back, and that's it. It was episode 22 when we last spoke to you, and if you haven't listened to that, then you should do. So go back to episode 22. That was back in January of this year. Listen to it on Spotify, YouTube. We obviously video these things as well, so check those out. So if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, do so. But it was a great chat in which basically Paul introduced his system of thinking, really, which has kind of culminated in the creation of the Amazing 12, which is not only a program that everyday person can go and take part in, but it's also something that instructors train themselves up to become better instructors. It's something I personally run in my facility, and it's very successful for me, and it gets great results. And so we go into depth in that podcast around that system, but we had so many questions. The thing is Paul thinks very differently about the way you should approach strength training and just physical betterment in general. And so many questions just arise through conversation. And today is just an opportunity to kind of maybe go over some of those things in a bit more detail. And he left us on an interesting kind of, like Charles Dickens used to have these endings of each chapter so that you would have to read the next one. And this is very much the same today. So it's about the mechanics of strength. How do you develop a strong individual? What are people doing that's wrong? How can you do it differently? What is the methodology that's most effective? I mean, there's so many questions we can go into it. But Paul, welcome to the show again. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm glad to be back, guys.
Glad to be back. So
I don't know why I'm talking in an American accent. I'm from Ireland.
So, yeah, I mean, when we last spoke, we went into depth on the Amazing 12, and we went into some of the concepts around why it's such an effective program. And we talked about this principle of comfort expansion. Mm-hmm. And I know the program through my own experience of running it, and I see people really grow and thrive. And many of those individuals have never really done a strength training program before. They've never been consistent as individuals. And whenever they've gone into the gym, it's very much random. But there's also people who are very experienced who come into that program and see excellent results as well, because, perhaps they've never really optimized their strength training. I suppose a good place to start is, what captivates you about strength training? And what makes it such a deep subject for you?
What captivates me about it?
Yeah.
Everything. That's the short answer. See you later. Goodbye. Every damn thing.
Thanks for coming.
No, I hope you got as much out of this as I did. No, it's kind of been a microcosm for my whole life. Strength's been so important to me on every level, personally, professionally, pretty much on every level of success that I've ever had. And I mean, I haven't always been successful at everything that I've ever done, just like every human being. And if I can trace, if I can draw a direct correlation between any one variable and success and failure, it's strength and weakness, right? And that can be physical strength, it can be emotional strength, it can be mental strength. And it can be it's often a combination of all three of those things we're asked to display in varying ratios depending on the task. It's more often than not emotional strength, just in everyday life. So strength in general, I know I'm going off on a tangent again, don't worry, I'll reel it into the actual bare bones of physical training for contractile muscular strength. But just on a broader overview, you asked me quite a metaphysical question, so I'm not going to get completely into the physical answer straight off the bat. Strength is a 360-degree master quality of humanity. It is, you know, and I might not agree with everything that, you know, like a lot of people in different organizations espouse that mantra, and I might not agree with all that they say, but I certainly agree with that. That much is true, right? If you are stronger, everything is easier, right? That's what's so captivating about it, to get straight to your question. That's what captivated me about it. The fact that, and then the realization, and this is segueing into the mechanics of it, the realization that there's so much more of it within all of us than we ever knew possible. At any one time, without actually going through the process of building something new, there is a reservoir of supra maximal strength, be that mental, physical, or emotional, and all three at once, in any of us at any one time. The realization of that came to me early in life when I had to face certain physical, mental, and emotional challenges that I had previously previously capitulated in an attempt to be successful in overcoming certain things. And then when the exact same person, me in this case, but it could be anybody, when I say nothing special about me, there's everything special about me, but it's the same special stuff that's in everybody else. So special isn't special, right? But it is, right? Paradoxic, woo, we're getting deep right off the bat. And then seeing that the exact same person, in this case me, without doing anything particularly different, was just able to reach deeper and find more and actually complete something that I didn't think was possible. So that the realization that there's always more, that there's a reservoir of strength in us all, that we don't actually have to do anything different in order to ignite, that something just has to trigger it. There's some sort of metaphysical trip switch that we can't quite, that trips a physical switch, right? It's like where those two things, those two lines blur together, and something hyper emotional that almost transcends the physical reality stimulates the physical entity to be capable of more in any one instance. That to me is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And it can come right down to the physical bare bones of actual mechanical strength. And here we go, because did you like it?
Right. This is where the podcast begins, by the way, if you just
weaving this story.
I'm weaving it like some sort of spider's web. Well, but everything's geometry, as in a spider's web. Everything's mathematics and everything's numbers play. And when you get the numbers right, you can elicit responses, correct answers, let's say, from the physical reality with which you inhabit at any one time. And in relation to strength, okay, so right off the bat, the first thing to understand and to get out of the way is that nobody really fully 360-degree understands how the human body builds strength, right, or gets stronger. That's something that most people don't actually fully appreciate. We have a kind of a blind faith in sports science, I would say, and I'm technically I'm from sports science. I'm a sports scientist, so to speak. I'm a strength and conditioning specialist and all these things. And this is my so-called area of expertise and everybody else who works in this area. But the truth of the matter is that, scientific studies, even around really important subjects like medical subjects, require a lot of funding, require a lot of time. And like anything else, participation levels and funding dictate the quality of the results. Right now, if you can picture how much more important to humanity something like medicine is, right, versus getting bigger and stronger, then you can maybe have, a concept of how infinitesimally small the budget is around sports science relative to other scientific topics. So we are still in the embryonic stages of the understanding of how to fully manipulate training variables. There's nobody who can really put their finger on optimal in sports science, right? So one of the big mistakes that people make straight off the bat, not saying dismiss it, because we're never going to get there unless we keep doing it and keep improving sports science and keep improving studies that are done. But to the trained eye, most studies that come out and say most things are flawed, like massively from top to bottom. And when you break them down, especially the epidemiological studies, there's so many variables that aren't accounted for, or so many nuanced perspectives that aren't highlighted, that it really makes the point moot almost, right? Now, that's not to say we don't understand certain things and understand them very well. We do, but there's still a mystery. There's still a level of mystery, like magic and mystery is kind of science that hasn't been fully understood yet, right?
Yep.
But that's not to say it's not magical, right? There's always a metaphysical aspect of the physical reality, and every time we physicalize a metaphysical, there's a metaphysical there's something outside of that that's metaphysically not understood again. Okay, so reality and what that represents and what our understanding of everything in life, but especially sports science, represents is a movable feast, right? It's like everything. We once thought the earth was flat. Now that's ridiculous to most people, right? We once thought that, a man couldn't run a sub 4-minute mile, and now that's ridiculous because there's kids in high school that are able to do it, right? Exceptional kids, but nonetheless, it's not, we've come a long way since Roger Bannister in 1954. So how we get stronger and the mechanics of that isn't fully understood. That's the base that we must start from when talking about this. But the two areas that have been kind of researched most or understood most as to how the human body improves in strength is myofibril thickening and increased neurological efficiency, right? So I'm proposing a subsect which doesn't supersede or sit parallel to those, but that is interwoven into the fabric of both and serves both equally well. A subtext that isn't understood, or that isn't understood, but that hasn't really been looked at or considered as deeply as the other two. It's almost the why inside the how, if that makes any sense. And once you understand that, it's like learning ABC, and this word means chair, and that's a chair, but then learning how to actually a dialect and how to actually interact with human beings. There's a subtlety to it that's different than just the mechanics of 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, so myofibril thickening is essentially the breakdown of muscular proteins, actin and myosin, and muscle, which makes up muscle fiber, and the thickening of that happens subsequent to a period of supercompensation, i.e. when you rest, your body has a chance to recover and release or put mechanisms into place which help you recover, which is sped on by the fuel or the building blocks that you put into your mouth, most notably protein, okay, which are broken down into amino acids and polypeptides and all that lovely stuff that nobody cares about, but it does its thing. on a cellular level, and everybody gets bigger, and as a result gets stronger, because even with the same level of muscular innovation, i.e. the amount of electrical juice that you can, or the amount of muscle fibers that a motor unit can innervate, okay, a bigger muscle fiber will produce, all other things being equal, will produce more force. Okay, so one of the lowest hanging fruit, so to speak, ways to get stronger is to get bigger, right? However, that becomes then increasingly harder over time beyond a certain point, especially if you're natural. Well, there's a number of compounding factors that exist all the way. Human beings and their ability to build muscle and their ability to get stronger from that increased muscle size exist on a continuum, as most things in reality does. And, you know, let's say all the way from super genetically advantaged male in the prime of their life and prime testosterone levels between 21 and 25 or something along those lines, with a high preponderance of fast twitch muscle fibers and chemically enhanced to an optimal level, right? That is like the ultimate human being that we have right now. That's the easiest gainer. And right the way to a non-chemically enhanced, you know, elderly senior citizen female, right, who has let's say sub-average genetic ability even within her own age group and gender, right? So that's the scope essentially between able-bodied human beings, right, on Earth right now. And where you sit on that scope is going to be directly proportional to your ability to get bigger. And if you're not chemically enhanced, which most people aren't, and you know, something that I've never been, and anything that I've achieved has been naturally, so I have a good understanding of how to do it naturally. The game is different. The game is different when it comes to building muscle, but certainly increased muscle size is one quick way in most cases of increasing muscle force. And then the other way is increased neurological efficiency, i.e. getting more juice from the same size of muscle fibers, okay? And that can be seen in the sports of Olympic weightlifting and powerlifting, and even gymnastics and rock climbing and things like that, boxing and MMA, where you've got lighter athletes who get stronger and stronger year in and year out without an appreciable or even negligible increase in lean body mass or any other type of body mass. You go about those two goals different ways programmatically when you're training for them. However, if you're not competing in or training for a weight division sport or a sport which is predicated on being light, for example, a jockey, a gymnast, a rock climber, you know, anything like that, there's not necessarily weight divisions for those sports, but you don't see many 200-pound Olympic gymnasts, okay, that are like over 6 feet tall. It just doesn't happen, right? You probably got a lot of guys who are, you know, can do gymnastics well, but there's going to be a cutoff point, and you know, how far you go relative to your ability is going to be directly proportional to your physical size, right? So how you go about training for those things is different. However, the subtext that everybody's kind of either not understanding or fully brushing up on is the fact that, well, how do you increase those things? How do you increase muscle growth? What's the fastest way of doing that? Okay, what's the fastest way of increasing neurological efficiency? What's the fastest way for the body to get stronger? Well, one of the best ways is to not look at it as a process of building something new, whether it is or not, whether it's improved neurological efficiency or whether it's a combination of that and myofibril thickening as a result of whatever the loading parameters that you're using within your programmatic variables, i.e. is the training weighted towards growth? Is the training weighted towards strength without growth? Regardless of what way it's weighted in terms of the programmatic variables or the emphasis of the training, the outcome that it's trying to emphasize, what should be understood is that it's better to look at it as convincing an already existing level of might or strength to be allowed to be expressed rather than forcing an entity which doesn't have said reserve to build something new from scratch.
What exactly is that? Because is that a trust from the nervous system?
It is
a mental belief system.
It's all of the above, but really what it is a communication with the central nervous system. Now it helps to think of the central nervous system as a separate entity, and in some ways it is. Really, it's not. You are your central nervous system, and your central nervous system is you. But from a pragmatic point of view, it helps to think of it as a separate entity, a governor, if you will, who sits at the door of the strength reserve and decides whether or not to allow you more or not, like a bouncer at a club. You're going to be far more successful. You'll catch more, you'll catch more flies with honey, right? You'll be far more successful trying to convince and joke your way past the bouncer than you are to physically force your way past the door stuff, right? So that's kind of an analogy, right? An everyday kind of analogy, way to think about it. And in many ways, that kind of is a good fit, because, you know, we know that the human body is capable of exerting superhuman levels of physical force, you know, not at a whim, but at a whim to the CNS, like not at the whim of your free will, but at a whim of almost like a subsect separate entity that sits within you called the central nervous system, which decides, now it's time to make you superhuman for a second here so that we can survive this, or whatever the case may be. We've all heard the pop culture stories of people deadlifting cars off children to save them. And these things aren't urban myths. Obviously, there's probably a degree of exaggeration in some of them. But, you know, with the event of the video era, there's even videos of people actually doing things. I remember seeing a video of a guy lifting a helicopter to save his friend who was was trapped inside this helicopter. Absolutely remarkable. There was a program, I think on the Discovery Channel or something along those lines, Nat Geo or something like that, where there was a guy trapped underneath a boulder, a rock climber, and his muscles were torn upon impact, and his thorax was broken, and one of his arms was fractured, right? And for a long time, he was just trapped, and he was getting increasingly more dehydrated and weaker and weaker and weaker. So with every passing minute, he was in a more sub-maximal environment to execute maximum strength, right? It's not like he was optimally warmed up. He's going out to the bench press and he's about to sniff some smelling salts and everything's perfectly balanced. And when it mattered most and he had the physical least, he got the rock off himself, right? He was able to move it by a couple of centimeters, enough for him to slide out. And he wasn't able to do that before. And he unofficially shattered every partial bench press style, like pin press record ever, you know, known to mankind. And he did so with not a particularly strong body and broken and dehydrated, right? So there's nobody really knows how much reserve our CNS has within itself. Okay, it's all about electrical innovation. And, you know, there's been anecdotal stories of guys getting electrocuted on the electric chair and they tear the chair apart. It doesn't happen all the time. But what you're seeing there is something maybe going wrong with, like, you know, old school equipment or something like that. And a human being's motor units being maximally innervated artificially. And then that's where the stories come from of people being demonically possessed and coming back to life and tearing things apart. And, oh, that was an evil guy. And, you know, it was a guy who was, maybe he was an evil guy, but that was demonstrating maximal muscular innervation, albeit for a brief moment. So it's all mechanics and it's all finding ways to get more from more. And when we look at, so if it's a conversation, right? If it's a conversation, and it is, then you're not forcing a topic. So then the question becomes, well, what's the best way to have this conversation? What's the best conversation to have with this entity, right? Now, whether or not you are convincing the central nervous system to become neurologically efficient or more neurologically efficient and allow you to use less of a genetically predetermined ceiling, okay? Or whether or not you're convincing the CNS to allow you to use a higher percentage beyond the predetermined genetic ceiling, it actually doesn't matter from a pragmatic perspective. The only thing that matters is the result, okay, which is a higher force production, right? And we know that there is a ceiling because it's been tested. And that's actually one of the things that there is good sports science around, where, you know, it literally is cause and effect. You can't get it wrong. We are measuring maximum muscle innervation in a 1 rep max attempt when we're trying our hardest at certain static strength tasks. And it's been measured that in everyday individuals, or the average Joe on the street, 30% of the motor units available in the musculature. Now, that's not some sort of wordplay where you were doing a bench press, but you weren't using your legs a lot, right? That means the prime movers and the secondary movers in the movement, i.e. pecs, triceps, anterior delts. You're using 30% of the motor units that are available, right? With elite lifters as high as 50. Now, we're not sure, right, whether it's chicken or egg there with the elite weightlifters, whether or not that's, you know, the reason why they're elite weightlifters, or at least one of the reasons, is because they have a higher genetic predetermined ceiling, or because the years and years of weight training have raised that ceiling. There hasn't been enough money to do a long enough term study. It's also not really ethical. We predict you're going to be elite. So we're going to follow you until you are. Oh shit, we just wasted 10 years. You're not elite, right? So you think about the feasibility of these studies, of how we can determine it, but it's either one or the other, right? So we know that, but either way, 50% and 30% are low, right? And there seems to be something beyond that 50 to 70% deficit, because I don't know what that rock climber's 1 rep max bench press was, but I'm sure it would have been a lot less with a broken sternum, right? And broken arms and this and that. And I'm sure 70% more than it wasn't going to equate to the weight of that rock, right? You know what I'm saying? So, you know, there's something going on here with the body's ability to stimulate force production that we're not fully aware of, but there's definitely a trip switch, there's definitely a governor, and there's definitely a kind of parent-child relationship with your physical strength and your central nervous system on some level. It's like, you know, you'll give a child progressively more of something as its mental capacity and physical capacity increases to be able to handle it, but you're not going to hand a child an Uzi, right, with the safety clip off and say, go play with the buses. You know, go on out there and play with the traffic on the freeway. Sure, what could go wrong? So it's almost like when that's the other thing that people don't realize. Maximum innovation, the maximum capacity of human strength is very dangerous for us. Okay, when maximally innovated, a muscle tissue is capable of tearing bones apart, breaking your bones, tearing tendons off bones, ligaments off bones, you know, tendons off muscle, everything, just to turn yourself apart with your own force production. So like everything else that we, you know, in our eternal human hubris, like to think that we know better as to why certain things are happening with our bodies and why can't we just do this? Like most other things like that, evolution has had a better idea when it comes to strength and, like, you know, keeping us in our place. There's a good reason why it's, let's say, the ace in the hole. You know, it's either this or death is kind of what it's saved for. So there's a reserve there, and there's a conversation, and there's a parent character, you know, and there's decisions being made, right? And again, whether or not it's allowing for more, allowing you to use less of the genetically predetermined 30 to 50%, or allowing you more, I had a 51%, 52%, whatever, right? Or the process that happens between 30 and 50, because we don't yet know whether or not that's something that elite weightlifters are born with, or they've developed it through training. You know, or if there is studies to that effect, I haven't read them, but I'll put it out there. There might be, and maybe I just don't have that information. However, regardless of what the process actually is, the outcome, pragmatically speaking, to the lifter which is going to be 99.9% of people who ever listen to something like this or enter a gym, is all that matters. Okay. And the way to go about, so the only thing really to ask there is, well, then what are the conversations that we can have with this? What's the best conversation we can have with this entity to convince them to let us produce more force, regardless of what the physical mechanism of that is?
I mean, is it in a way, and is it an interesting question, is what are bad conversations to have to start with? What is a bad conversation for someone to have? Because most people will go into a gym and have a bad conversation with the central nervous system.
Yes.
And I'm sure we've all done that ourselves.
Yes.
What would you say a bad conversation would be?
Well, funny enough, once you know what the bad conversation looks like, the good conversation just reveals itself, and vice versa, really, because they're the yin to each other's yang, and one is a direct polar reflection of the other. And you know, if you're gonna look for answers, you may as well look in the things that have gone before. Let's look at let's analyze the previous best conversations and worst conversations that have been had, and see, let's treat this scientifically by a process of elimination and see, can we find commonality in the process. So the first thing to note, which is what I've said previously or immediately previous to this, is that strength is perceived as dangerous by your central nervous system from an evolutionary perspective, right? And this will set up how and why the previous best strength programs and conversations therein that have been had via those programs have allowed people more and more strength to a higher degree than other programs, because either consciously or subconsciously, those programs understand, even if the creators of them didn't, and maybe they did, but maybe they didn't, that the central nervous system, the human body as an entity, perceives strength largely as something that's dangerous. That's why the trip switch is there, because maximum innovation, as I said earlier, can literally tear you apart. It can be more dangerous than the thing that you're trying to exert strength for. Okay. It's like, picture you're in a fight and you just go 100%. Well, that first punch better kill him, because you've literally broken one of your own bones or tore one of your tendons, and et cetera, and now you're in a bigger pickle. So strength is, from an evolutionary perspective, is perceived as dangerous. You know, I have to laugh sometimes when people talk about caveman workouts and desert island workouts and this and that. And let me tell you something, right? Cavemen weren't doing pull-ups off trees and doing burpees with logs on their back, and you know what I mean? Listen, all that's fun and it's great, right? And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not making fun of it, but let's call it what it is. It's modern man training in a modern natural environment, right? It's not caveman training, right? Cavemen did as little as humanly possible. Yeah. Cavemen did as little as humanly possible to not expend as much energy as possible, to not risk running their immune system down, to not risk getting their foot cut on a twig, because there's no such thing as antibiotics, to not risk getting hurt in a fight or a climb or this or that, right? People were probably ripped and probably naturally stronger because testosterone levels are suspected to be higher in the Stone Age. There seems to be a linear regression in male testosterone levels all the way from the Stone Age right to today, which is depressing but true. And how do we know this? Well, we can see that's by observing the skeletons of ancient man and some of the testosterone related bone morphology of the skull, the jaw, the first to third digit, first to fourth digit ratio on the hands, okay, i.e. Index finger to ring finger length ratio, and bone densities and muscle attachments and different things. Okay, we can estimate to a large degree of accuracy, you know, how robust this man's system was at producing testosterone. And also by looking at, again, the second to fourth digit ratio, how much testosterone the individual, male or female, was exposed to in the 14th week of gestation in the womb. And this is with a 10,000-year-old skeleton or a 100,000-year-old. And we can do it today by looking at our own hands. It's fascinating. There's work by a guy called Dr. John Mannering, I think it's Manning. And he's done some fascinating work about digit ratio and testosterone levels and how that affects behavior and brain type and all these different things. However, so these dudes were probably quite muscular anyway, is my point, due to genetics and due to not overeating. But they're not going to be walking about looking like bodybuilders because it just wasn't important. And excess muscle required excess calories, which just didn't exist. You ate what you could kill. You know, you weren't living on an orchard eating all this fruit, because depending on where you lived in the world, that just didn't grow, right? Which is why we became omnivorous. Which is why we can throw spears better than any other great ape. We can throw rocks. The architecture of our shoulder has evolved to be able to throw. It's a direct adaptation to hunting, which is why we sweat better than any great ape and any other mammalian terrestrial mammal, which is why we catch any other terrestrial mammal in a run. If we run long enough, we catch a horse, we catch an elk, we catch a dog, we catch a cheetah, we catch everything eventually. The human body has, because it's for hunting, right? And there's still a tribe in Africa that hunts like this, will pursue an elk for up to 4 hours and then throw a spear and kill it. You know, so.
There's a really good BBC, I think it's a David Attenborough thing, about 5 or 6 minutes long on YouTube. Hunter-gatherer just searching for.
That's the one. That's the one. That's the one where you'll see the footage of these guys doing it. I haven't seen the full documentary, but I can remember it was Attenborough who was narrating it because he's such a recognizable voice.
He was wearing trainers though.
Was he?
Yeah, he was.
Was he? Was he?
Yeah, I think he was.
I don't remember that, but well, yeah.
They're old trainers. He'd obviously worn them for a while.
Well, let's put it this way. If it offers him an advantage, he's probably just doing it because it offers him an advantage. But that method existed for thousands of years, right back to the Stone Age. So the point of the matter is that, you know, caveman workouts and all this, cavemen didn't work out. Okay, so holding on to huge amounts of muscle is not something that the body has evolved to want to do unless it's forced, right? Making you stronger is seen as a threat. So unless there's a very good reason, your body doesn't allow you to do it. Or, right, so there's the adapt or die approach, which is what most people force the body to do. And I personally feel that the reason why that plateaus so quickly and strength beyond newbie gains, and you know, your ability to make newbie gains is directly proportional again to where you sit on that continuum of muscle building, strength building potential genetically and or chemical enhancement. But for most people, newbie gains are over and done with very quickly. And the adapt or die approach is only really good for beginners up to potentially early intermediate at best. And then it slows down to a crawl. We can see that listen, maybe there hasn't been a ton of long-term studies done, but the anecdotal evidence is all around us. And I don't know about you, but we're all men in our 40s and we don't have time for the rest of the studies to come out into this and that. We have to make our decisions based on real world boots on the floor, in the trenches, anecdotal evidence and information that has played out over decades at this point. Okay. In the lab that is the gym, right? And been proven in the testing room that is the playing field, the battleground that is the ring, the field, the pitch, the this, the that. Okay.
I think, like you say, I mean, the potential for there to be an accurate study for any of this stuff, there's so many variables out there. It will never happen, will it? I mean, all the tests that you see done at universities tend to be with untrained individuals, don't they, in their 20s?
Untrained college males, which may as well just say most optimal muscle building strength building group ever. You know, and you know, the results that come out of a 6-week study, regardless of what population it's looking at, or even an 8-week study, are largely irrelevant, because anybody with halfway decent genetics can make some sort of progress if they make a solid effort, especially in an environment like that, because people don't understand that you kind of want to do well. It's a regimented environment. You're coming in, there's other test subjects, men get competitive. So there's other variables that you might not even know about, that they're going away and starting to take supplements or other things, and I'm going to sign this to say, honest to goodness, I'm not going to change my diet, but then my mate's gaining muscle faster than I am. Human beings are going to do what human beings are going to do, unless you're going to do something unethical, or make them sign up to something where they overtly agree to stay in a facility and be monitored, Big Brother style. And nobody has the money to do something like that for something like the bench press, right? We don't even have money to do that for things like cancer, right? Which is infinitely more important than how to improve your overhead press strength, your deadlift, right? So it's naive to think that these studies are showing anything other than what they show, right? So just be very sure that what they show is what they show, and that you understand what they show and take it for what it means, but nothing more than what it means. Okay.
It's like the Instagram photos of a 14-year-old boy and then a 24-year-old man, and look at the
muscle transformation. Yeah, I know. I know. And what about the endocrine transformation that nature provided you with? And then on top of that, you probably artificially enhanced that again. If you hadn't lifted weights at all, if I showed you a picture of me when I was 14, right? Listen, I was still a boy up until 18, pretty much. I was a boy physically. I was actually getting worried. I went to the doctor, like, what's going on? All my friends are this and that, and their voices are this and that, and their this is this and that, and mine just not. Just no hair, no nothing, no deep voice, no muscles, short, skinny. When I was 16 years old, I was 5'7" and 106 pounds. Right? I'm bigger than that now. I'm a wee bit bigger than that now. And I had a squeaky voice and all this, and there was no body hair, and so
a body weight deadlift
means nothing really. Even if you're a more normal teenager than that, you're not such a late developer. It happened all at once, and then I was like, whoa, right? Because I kind of enjoyed an athletic advantage as a pre-teen among my peer group, things like sprinting and different sports. And then it went away in my teenage years, and I was distraught by this. But imagine going from the number one, this and that, to like the number 5 or 6, getting beat by people who you used to beat at different things, losing in fights even to kids whose asses used to kick quite easily. But now they're head and shoulders taller than you, and they've got muscles, and they're 3 stone heavier, and they've got a deep voice. But then it all just came back all of a sudden. And again, it felt more like preteen in terms of the percentage differences. So yeah, those pictures on Instagram are bullshit. Unless you're talking about a human being who was at adult maturity and who wasn't chemically enhanced, then, but it's the adapt or die response, which most people apply to trying to force the central nervous system to adapt or die. And this will only work up to a finite point, and we see that all the time.
Is that failure? Is you calling that muscular failure, or what do you mean exactly?
Yeah. You're training the muscular failure or beyond. You're doing intensification methods as a means, like, drop sets, eccentric, forced eccentrics, forced reps, going to failure, and then, supra maximal techniques like forced reps and things like that to go beyond failure and all this. It's not to say failure doesn't work. Like, for example, there's a lot of studies, and this is another example of how an uneducated interpretation of a scientific study can lead to misleading information on the outcomes. Most studies which study failure-based training versus submaximal non-failure-based training come out in favor of the failure-based training in terms of both strength and muscular hypertrophy. And that's because most studies that do it are doing it with untrained college age males for 6 to 8 weeks, right? And if you've got a highly responsive group like that, who's pushing hard for the first time ever, they're going to gain faster than people who aren't, right? But that is irrelevant to almost everybody who trains, because beyond 6 weeks, it's not you anymore. Beyond a certain age, it's not you anymore. And outside of a single gender, it's not you anymore. So we have to look at this in a more 360-degree way and ask, well, that's great, but where does the ultimate destination of this training lie, right? And that brings us to the other method of gaining strength, which is essentially having a conversation with your central nervous system and convincing it to allow you to have more, right? Which is where I come in. But I come in on top of the shoulders of giants as well, even though the way I speak about it is different, even though I believe, which I haven't explained yet, but I will, the progression on the best currently espoused ideas on the topic, those ideas still preceded my ideas and provided the foundation for my thinking about how to progress them and take the next step. It's like everything else in humanity. If you're going to endeavor to do something for a living, you must endeavor to do two things. You must endeavor to study the best that has come before you, understand why it's the best and why other things weren't, and then dare to be bold enough to offer a progression on the previous best ideas. This is how we've single-handedly ascended from the cave to the iPhone, right? So applying that to strength, the first place to look is the history of previous best ideas. Where do we find them? We find them where the people have been getting stronger beyond 6 weeks, right? We find them where people have been getting stronger for years, sometimes for decades, back to back. We find them in the strongest men and women in the world. And, you know, some people scoff at that because they think, well, these are genetically superhumans and this and that. Yes, fair enough. Maybe they are, but guess what? They're competing against other genetic superhumans, and they are the forerunners of human performance in this modality that you're trying to improve called strength. So maybe them and their coaches have figured out something that you and your bodybuilding magazine that you bought for $3.99 off a shelf in Easton's doesn't know yet. Right? So let's have a look at something that maybe you haven't heard on a bodybuilding forum from a 16-year-old claiming to know everything. And what we see when we look at strength cycling, which is probably the culmination of better mainstream ideas currently, is an increased time spent training in relative comfort. Think about a typical strength cycle for powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting or strongman. It starts off one place and you're lifting sub-maximal percentages. And there's a difference between 80% of an 80% load and an 80% effort. That's just, I know I'm shooting from one place to the next, but as I'm going to try and pick things off. When I talk about percentages and proximity to max, I'm talking about not only the weight, I'm also talking about percentage of maximum effort with that weight. So strength cycling sees both sub-maximal loads used, i.e. anything less than 100%, and the sub-maximal effort made with said load, i.e. leaving reps in the tank, okay? Or performing that set at a lower RPE than failure, okay? And it's quite a distal proximity to maximum initially, and it gets progressively closer and closer over the weeks and weeks, but it never touches it until the day of the competition. And that's when you go 100%, right?
What I find interesting about those two things, and particularly you and your own training and some of your own strength feats, is you have on one hand, you can correct me if I'm wrong, on one hand you have something that's very objective, which is as you put a heavier weight on, you know, it's something very real. But then we're talking about this relative perceived exertion, which is very internal.
Yeah.
And there is obviously a mathematical equation, because you can take a max and then you can do what you expect a relative perceived exertion of 80% would be. But one requires the individual to be very active in that process.
Yep.
So how do you navigate that when you're when you're making calculations, the
Well,
RPE?
Well, it's one of the reasons why when I work with online clients, 2 of which are on this call, hey Pete, hey Paul,
Hello.
2 little birdies sitting on a wall. James, what's keeping you?
The peer pressure.
You know what I mean? But anyway,
my CNS is sensing fear.
listen, the only thing I see on your horizon is mighty strength. But I can actually draw on the training of both yourself, Paul, and Peter, and the RP in general. It's one of the reasons why I require my online clients to send me videos, so that no matter what your perception, so no matter what your rate of perceived exertion is, I can tell you what it actually is. Because so perception of difficulty is a very arbitrary, subjective variable, and it's directly proportional to an individual's pain threshold, or maybe not even so much pain threshold as just perception of pain. You can have a very high pain threshold, but perceive it quicker than other people. That makes any sense? Like somebody can feel that it's sore than the next guy, but hold up to it for longer. Maybe does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so the waters get muddy, but one of the best ways to self-diagnose this is bar speed or bell speed, rep speed, rate of force exertion. Okay, relative to the maximum rate of force exertion, which probably happened early on in the set. Okay, so once you start to feel a significant drop off in rep speed, the RPE is going up, right? Now that's quite an arbitrary general catch-all. I don't really like those. I like to be a bit more accurate than that. However,
someone would experience it very, very acutely if they were doing the Amazing 12.
Yep.
Particularly in the big lifts that you do within the main 5-day week program or the Express.
Yep.
I definitely see that on week to week, session to session, that
Yep.
interplay between the load and their perceived exertion in the numbers that they record.
100%. And the real trick to getting stronger, I'm jumping ahead of myself here, but well, I'll not because I want to set it up better. But back to RPE for a second, a more concrete way to measure it, at least in singularity, is to test a certain weight for rep maximum, and the best, probably easiest all around to keep the mathematics simple for people, is a 10 RM, which is, if you have an average fiber distribution between slow and fast twitch, is likely to be approximately 75% of whatever your 1 rep maximum is. Now, that depends on how primed you were for your 1 rep maximum, how much skill you have, and the higher percentages and things like that. But generally speaking, a 10 RM is in the ballpark of 75% of your 1 RM. But regardless of the percentage, if you know you can do 10 reps with something, it's very easy then to work out what a 5 RPE is in your first set, because it's 5 reps, right? It's literally a 50% effort. It can't be anything else, right? Now, where that gets tricky is the RPE will raise in direct proportion to local muscular fatigue over a projected number of sets in any one workout. So what represents, if you're going for a 50% effort, right, and 50% RPE on every set, I'm just pulling that number. That's not particularly important. I'm just pulling that number out. Even we can say 80% or 70%, whatever percentage you want. Whatever number that represents at the start, you can accurately determine by knowing, what your rep maximum is with that particular weight. Especially if it's a double-digit rep number, you can more accurately know, right? From there, you must understand that you can always make the same percentage effort, regardless of how tired you get. But the number that it represents is going to get lower, right? Or you can keep on making the same number of reps, but the percentage effort that it's going to represent is going to get higher. Yeah. And in both those cases, your job is to make sure that it doesn't get so low that you're not doing any more reps, or that the effort doesn't get so high that the reps that you have preset don't hit too high up on the RPE scale, and don't take you to muscular failure. Now that's just a general guideline, and it's also something which only describes what happens in a single workout in singularity. It doesn't really tell you how to apply that in, over the course of a program, but it's a good piece of information to bear in mind as you're progressing.
So if you were to do 3 sets of 5, you're adding 5 kilos every week, and then you found that you were struggling to get that 4th, 5th rep on the last set, you perhaps modulate your perceived exertion by having a longer rest period or something like that to allow you to complete the reps.
There's a number of things that you can do, but what you're describing, which is actually, I'm glad you said that, because it brings me back to what it was the point that I segued off for some reason. What you're describing there is traditional strength cycling, right? And that's a linear progression pattern that you're describing, and there's all different patterns. The patterns almost don't matter as much as the overall goal, which was, as I say, to start light in both percentage and proximity to maximum effort, and to cycle that up till those things converge on the day of the competition. Now, here's what I'm going to say. What I did essentially with my comfort zone expansion ethos was look at that very linear progression of progressively better ideas and look for the one common denominator in them all, and the one that jumps out the most in the most recent and best version, which is strength cycling. And what that is an increased time spent training in comfort. That's the main thing that seems to run through all the best conversations to have with the CNS in regards to increasing strength output up to now.
Hello there. And we have decided, we've had a huge conversation here with Mr. Paul McIlroy. We have decided to actually separate this into 2 separate episodes. Okay. So we will continue with episode 54 next week with Paul McIlroy, which will be the Mechanics of Strength Part 2. So this is the end of episode 53. I just want to thank you all for listening. Please do share, like, subscribe, leave a review if at all possible. And we will see you next week back with Paul McIlroy to continue this fascinating episode. Take care, guys. See you later.
You've been listening to Health Odyssey with Peter Lant, Paul Bassett, and James St. Pierre. To get your regular fix of hype-free health, you can subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can find out more on today's and other topics at healthodyssey.com, or find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Health Odyssey.